we normally twist his arm to stay even longer than an hour. We can't do that today because this is the last hour of the radio broadcast. We're always honored to have him. He just flew back in from Mexico last night into New York. He's kicking off his tour today, and we're honored to have him on with us for the next hour. I don't know what it was about that last interview, but I heard from Jesse's folks it was his favorite interview here on the show. Listeners said it was their favorite, the most views online. Really great interview we did just about a month ago. And now Governor Jesse Ventura is back with us today. The good news is, in fact, here it is. Here's the book down here on the floor. Jesse Ventura, American Conspiracies, has been as high as number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been holding up at 7 in the top 10. And that shows the people are hungry for the truth. So I just want to say congratulations to Governor Jesse Ventura on another best-selling book.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thanks for all the help, because you certainly help in your show and listeners on that. But it's what's interesting, Alex, is that the book has not been reviewed by any book reviewer.
Ah.
Isn't that amazing? Here it's been in the New York Times top 10 for 4 weeks now, I think, and not one reviewer has even reviewed the book.
Well, I think that's an endorsement, just like the Huffington Post censored your article about 9/11, even though they asked you to write it. Now you're seeing censorship in the book world. That's unheard of. 4 weeks, New York Times top 10, and no book reviews.
Yeah, well, there's a few reviews on the internet, but there's been no reviews by any of the major media. No reviews of the book at all. Well, I think it's a case, Alex, where they feel that if they review it, they give it credibility, so they're staying away from it.
Unbelievable. We'll walk through some of the things that are covered in the book and why it's seen as controversial, but that's why the mainstream media is dying, is because people know they're acting as gatekeepers.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I just spoke earlier on another show, and they asked me why the mainstream media won't question the government. And I said it's simple, because if they don't play along with the government, they get no access to them. And if they're denied access to them, they're dead in the water. So therefore, they go along to get along so that they can do their jobs and continue to have access with, the senators, the congressmen, the president, and all that stuff. Because if they question anything, they lose that access, which is the kiss of death.
It is the kiss of death. When we come back, I want to get into the war. We're now almost 7 years into Iraq, or we are 7 years in now, in March. Last month. This was the 7th anniversary. We're 8 years into Afghanistan, and there's just no end in sight. When is it going to end?
Well, first thing I'd like to ask you, Alex, is what the hell are we accomplishing?
A bunch of weapon sales and oil.
That's the bottom line for me. And maybe I say this selfishly, but how have these two wars helped Jesse Ventura? Or how have these two wars helped Alex Jones? Or how have these two wars helped the average Joe citizen of this country? Other than bankrupting us, what is the ultimate goal that we will achieve to where we can all feel good about them?
Absolutely. If our country was invaded, that'd be one thing. Or even if we were an evil empire and the empire gave us some of the booty. But no, we pay for it for offshore corporations that get the money and power.
Exactly. And we're sitting here, our kids are dying over there. Well, you know what it clearly shows me, Alex? People should really wake up to the fact that the president ain't in charge.
That's a good point.
Because clearly Obama ran to get us out of the wars. He said he'd close down Gitmo. He said all of this stuff, and yet it's all gone the opposite way, hasn't it?
It has.
We're more into the wars. Gitmo's still here. So people should see clearly that the president is no longer in charge of the country.
And then the next question is, what do we do to reverse that? And I've documented that the government's provocateuring militias and other groups to demonize the Tea Parties and any opposition to that. We'll talk about it all with former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. His new book, a bestseller. Let's send it to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's in news stores everywhere. It's in airports. It's in bookstores. And it's available at Infowars.com, discounted. We'll be right back. Well, his television show got picked up for a second season. Record first season on True TV, their #1 news show. And we're going to talk about, because I keep getting these questions, I know Jesse's wondering, with all this censorship, with all this control, not one major news book reviewer will talk about his #4 on the New York Times bestseller list, American Conspiracies, 4 weeks in the top 10. So why is that being censored? Why do I get censored? But why is he allowed to have a TV show? We'll talk about that some coming up today. We'll talk about opium trafficking. We'll get into a whole host of issues. Pat Tillman, you name it. But Governor Jesse Ventura, for those that just joined us, we started getting into 8 years of Iraq, or 7 years of Iraq, 8 years of Afghanistan, no end in sight, new wars. They're expanding, all this footage coming out of reporters being massacred, being targeted, children being gunned down by Apache helicopters premeditatedly, all of that happening. And we were discussing during the break that this points out that the president isn't really the president and doesn't have the power. Let's break it down.
Well, I really don't think he does, and what's really educated me, Alex, is I'm in the process of finishing my second book by Colonel Fletcher Prouty. And I highly recommend people need to read the Colonel's books. He died in 2001 of June. But if you read Fletcher Prouty's books, one of them's called The Secret Team, and the other one is called JFK. And if you read those two books, it will become very clear that the history you've been taught is not the history of what's happened. And let me make my point here for a moment. Prouty was there. Who Fletcher Prouty was, do you remember the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, of course?
Yes.
He is the Donald Sutherland character. He is the real-life Mr. X, the guy that Costner goes to Washington and talks to him on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and then they sit on that bench, and he lays the whole thing out. Well, in real life, that was Colonel Leroy Fletcher Prouty, Colonel United States Air Force. And for, I think, 11 or 12 years, he was the top man, the liaison between the Pentagon and the CIA. And I can't tell people how much they need to read to understand. And when you read Prouty's books, you will become much more clear on what's happening, because Prouty tells you in the books that the entire Cold War was a setup. That there was a meeting that took place at the end of World War II, right before we technically were going to invade Japan, like Normandy, and then of course they dropped the 2 bombs and they didn't have to. But in preparing for that invasion, they moved massive armaments into Okinawa. Well, there was a meeting, because Prouty flew in Chiang Kai-shek, and it was between Chiang Kai-shek, who at that time was the head of China, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt. And at that point, it was determined that all wars from then on would be fought in third world countries, that there would be no direct objective that the military could achieve in which to declare victory. Now, look back, Alex, in our history since World War II. Is that not all true?
That is.
It's all true. That's what really resonated with me when I read Prouty's books. I went, oh my God, the things he said here is exactly what has gone down.
Well, let me be clear.
Wars are fought in third world countries. Oh, and remember them armaments that I told you they put in Okinawa? Do you know what became of those?
No.
They were split in half. Half of them, according to Colonel Prouty, half of them went to Korea and half of it went to Ho Chi Minh. They were setting up for the next 2 wars. Now,
well, Governor,
it follows through with all of this shit, excuse me on the radio, I shouldn't have said that, but all of this stuff in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all of it fits right into what Colonel Prouty talked about.
Well, I'm chomping at the bit here, and I want to sit back and shut up, and you can tell us what you've learned. But this is what's so incredible. I've known you for about 4.5 years now, and the process, you knew about Gulf of Tonkin, you knew about the lies of Vietnam, you were very well informed. You've been visited by the CIA when you were governor, but it's been a process of you reading and researching, and now to see you, I interviewed Prouty, had to be like in 1997. We've been digging around looking for the tapes, and I have read over his work. I've read his first book, not the second one you're talking about, And then you discover that Joe McCarthy was actually right, but he was being used to set up a police state domestically with low-level communists. But as soon as he found out the Pentagon was running everything, remember, that was what they said was so absurd, then they set him up and destroyed him and used the term McCarthyism to demonize him. But then it was declassified 7 years ago or 6 years ago that the Russians said, no, it's true, he was right. And then you learn that the whole geopolitical system is a war against individual populations. And there was a deal with the Russians to build up their police state. They would take over half the world. The U.S. would build up its police state and military system and take over its other half and go into these black hole wars to then militarize a cadre of men to come back and take over the domestic country itself. And now you're researching that, Governor. It's so exciting.